Now, anytime that you make a necklace or a bracelet, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to be finishing it off with some sort of a clasp. And clasps are not something that you think too much about. It's an afterthought. You either just buy one or you pick one out of your stash and just go with it. But a number of years ago, we were trying to finish up a project and we needed 20 identical clasps. We didn't have 20 that were all the same. And so we thought, well, maybe we should just make them. And we sat down and we came up with a couple of quick clasps, which we put together in just a matter of a short time. And we had them ready for a class that we were teaching. Today, I'm going to show you how to make 2 of these clasps. We're going to be making just a simple J hook, and then we're also going to be making an S hook clasp. You've probably used these many times, and they're just so easy to make. I think it's important that everyone should have this skill. Now, to begin this project, you really only need a couple of items. You need something in order to round out the clasp. We're going to start with a pair of round nose pliers, and then we'll show you a couple of other things that you can use. You're also going to need a pair of flat nose or chain nose pliers. You're going to need a flush cutter of some sort. You could probably use a regular cutter, but a flush cutter is just a lot cleaner. Now, along with this, we're going to be using a marker, a Sharpie marker in this case, for a couple of them, and then it doesn't hurt to have some sort of a ruler. Optional items as well is a hammer and a block. Now let's talk briefly about wire. Depending upon what size clasp that you're going to need, you're going to have various sizes of wire that you're going to be able to pull in and use. I don't recommend using a wire smaller than 20 gauge, but you can do 19 gauge, 18 gauge, 16, 14, just as big as you want. But again, I wouldn't recommend going much smaller than 20 gauge. Now to begin with, what we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of wire and we're going to make a J hook first. And to make a J hook, you're going to need about 1.5 to 2 inches of wire, depending upon the thickness of the wire and how big you're going to make the clasp. You could potentially use a little bit more. And the first thing you're going to want to do is flush cut the end so you have a nice flat surface to work with. And then if you have a hammer and block, we're going to go ahead and we're going to flatten about 1/4 inch here at the very end. And you can see we've just flattened that a little bit. And then let's start with the round nose pliers. And we're going to take that little flattened piece and grab with the tip of our pliers, holding the very end of the wire, squeezing it tight. We're going to round this until we get something that looks like a little C or reverse C shape. Then we're going to take our chain nose or our flat nose pliers, just grab the end, and we're just going to squeeze that down. And that will make the end of the clasp. Now, if you don't have a hammer and a block, again, flush cut the end of the wire so that you have a nice clean surface to begin with. Take your chain nose pliers and just grab the end. And the smaller the pliers, probably the better. These are kind of big ones, but we'll make it work. And again, you bring that around. Again, kind of make your C shape, and you can go ahead and finish that and bring it back to where it touches the wire. Or again, you can bring in the flat nose pliers and just squeeze that in. And that will allow you to finish that up. Next thing you're going to need to do, we've got our wire, and we bring in the chain nose pliers, and we pull that wire in along the round nose pliers, depending on how big of a clasp loop that you want. I want a fairly big one. This is 18 gauge wire, which I'm using right here. And so I'm pulling that down so that this little end piece that we've got is held tight. and right up against the jaws of the pliers. And then we're just going to round this around the plier until it comes back and touches that end. And there's the loop of the clasp. Now we take a ruler and about a ½ inch from where the end of the loop touches the wire, we're again going to take our flush cutters and we're going to cut the wire. Now, like I said, this is a ½ inch. Now, if you're going to make a bigger loop, you might want to go a little longer. I really probably wouldn't go smaller because there's things you can do to adjust it. So we're just going to cut the end off. And so there we have a ½ inch. We bring back the round nose pliers. We're going to move it up a little bit in the pliers, but again, hold the end of the wire. And just depending on how big of a loop you want. And then we're going to just wind this around. You may need to reposition your pliers at some point. And just bring it up until it touches the wire. Now, I personally don't like this little portion here, right up here at the end, where it's not rounded, it's kind of straight. And so I will bring in my flush cutters and I will just cut that little straight portion off. In fact, I'm going to cut it at a slight angle so if the end is going to be angled. Bring in the round nose pliers and just finish that curve until it touches the wire. Just like that. You can see we have a nice curve to it, a nice circle. I've angled the cut so it fits in there nice and really smooth. Now you can quit at this point, but if you do have a hammer and block, I like to take and just flatten the loop portion up here. It just does a couple of things. It adds a little decorative touch to it, but it also hardens the wire. So you can see how I've flattened that. And, you know, I'm going to just put a couple of hits on the connecting loop as well. Again, this hardens the wire. It makes it so it's not going to bend out of shape. And there we have our J-hook. Plain and simple, we made it in just a matter of a minute or so. Now, just supposing you don't have, or you don't want to use your round nose pliers, or you want every single one of your loops to be exactly the same. You have a couple of options. One, you can take your Sharpie and you can mark on your round nose plier where you want the loop to be, both the clasp loop and the connecting loop. I would put 2 marks, and that way every one of your clasps will be exactly the same. The other thing you can do is if you've got a pair of bell making pliers, you can pull this in, and you can wrap your wire around here. And again, you get a nice shape. Every one will be exactly the same. You don't have unlimited choices, but you have several choices that you can do here. The other thing you can do is if you don't have either one, you can just use this as a step bell. This is 10, 9, 8, 7, 6 millimeters. And again, you can take your wire and you just start bending it around the bell. Try to keep that opening loop on the outside, and just fold this around. And once you start folding it, work with the end here and get it hold it in tight. and bring it around again until it touches. And again, you've got a really nice loop that you can start with and begin to work with. Okay, so there's our J hook. Now, what about an S hook? Very, very similar. I've got a 3-inch length of wire here, and I've already flush cut one end. If you can see in the light, that's been cut smoothly across. And what we're going to do is, before we start, we're going to measure the wire, which this is just short of 3 inches. It's like 2 7/8. And so what we want to do is we want to mark the very middle using a Sharpie. So we're going to go 1 7/16 would be the halfway mark on the wire. So just put a little mark on there. You can see it. And we're going to give this just a second to dry. Otherwise it will wipe off and we won't have the mark. Okay, now just like with the J hook, we bring in our hammer and block if you're going to use it. If you're not, just go ahead and make your loop on the end. And we're going to hammer again about 1/4 of an inch. That looks pretty good. Grab our round nose pliers, hold on to the tip of the wire with the tip of the pliers, and just round it so that you get this nice C shape. Take your pliers, grab the end, and just squeeze it down. That gives us the end of the clasp. Again, we're going to bring in the round nose pliers, and I've got this little C shape. We're going to make the curve in the opposite direction. So I'm going to have this facing me. I'm going to grab it in the round nose pliers right down here at the base. And we will just take this around the round nose pliers, folding it around, trying to keep a nice round shape and bring it till it touches. You're going to get a little bit of spring back. Okay, so up to this point, it's just like doing the J hook, but here's where we're going to have a little bit of a difference. We've got that mark on there, and we're going to measure from where the wire, where the end of the clasp touches the wire, and we're going to measure to that mark, and it's 1/4 of an inch, and so we're 1/4 of an inch too long. So what we're going to do is take that number, we're going to double it, which will be 1/2 inch, and we're going to remove 1/2 inch from the end of the wire. We're going to flush cut it. So bring it in, remove that piece of wire. Now I know it looks like there's a lot of wire there, but let's see what happens. Bring our block back in if you're going to use it. And this is nice because you can actually hold on to this loop. And again, let's pound out about 1/4 of an inch again. Now you see I've got a little bit of a bend in there, and that's just because I've got my pliers or my hammer at a slight angle, but that won't be a problem once we're finished. Move the block out of the way. Bring in the round nose pliers, and we're going to make this little tiny bend for the end of the second loop, and we're going to bend it up in the same direction on the same side that you see this loop here. So again, grab the very end, make our little loop, bring in the flat nose or chain nose pliers, grab hold of it, this looks so cool, and just bend it in. Bring back the round nose pliers. I should have marked it. Pull it down tight so that little end comes right down there between the two tines on the round nose pliers. And then we're going to bend it around. Whoops. Bring it in till it meets the wire. And there we have our S-hook. Depending on how well you measure, these may come right directly together, like in this clasp, or there may be a little bit of a distance in there. Bring out our hammer and block, and just flatten the ends a little bit, not too much. And there we have a basic S hook, and we have our J hook all ready to go into your next project. Now, making clasps from wire is just a wonderful way to use extra wire. I finished up the end of a piece of wire, and there's enough here to make probably an S hook or a J hook. And so just really quickly as a refresher, now this is enameled wire. It's been coated and then enameled. And a lot of people say you can't hammer this wire, but let's find out. Flatten about 1/4 inch. Grab the pliers. Grab the very end of the wire. Make a little loop. Compress that down so that we have a little end. And let's use the baling pliers this time, or the rounding pliers. They've got all sorts of names. And we'll just hold that in tight and wrap that around until it comes back and touches. Bring in our ruler. And make a flush cut at 1/2 inch. Round those pliers with the very end. And make a loop. Bring it back to the pliers. Now I'm making a smaller loop here, and so it's going to have a longer shank than I would probably like. And so when I trim off this little flat part, I'll go a little farther down. And again, I'm cutting this at a slight angle. That way it fits in there a little nicer. Wow, that end really flew. Okay, bring it in until it touches. This is 20 gauge wire, by the way, so this is a little smaller. Let's flatten it just a little bit. See if I can do this without hitting my thumb. And let's hit that a little bit. And if you want to do a little tap on that very end, we put on there at the beginning, just to straighten it up a little bit. And there we have a hot pink J clasp. Right there. This is great because you're going to have clasps like nobody else. in your jewelry club. Like we got a little blue one there with teal. We got a red one, and these are just great. And I really haven't had a problem using the enameled wire and the hammer as long as you're careful. Now let's talk a little bit about embellishing. You know, it's great to have a nice simple clasp, but there are things that you can do. For example, instead of using round wire with this one, I used a square wire. And after I had finished the clasp and I had hammered the two ends, I just grabbed the two ends and twisted. Did 2 complete twists, and I get this fun little feature right here in the middle. Now here's a couple of simple embellishments that you can do. I've already hammered the end on this wire, and I'm just going to grab it. We're going to make the clasp end by bringing the wire around until it touches. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of wire. I believe this is 22 gauge wire. You could probably use 26, 24, 22. In fact, in a few cases, you could maybe even, for a really big clasp, you know, like 16, 14 gauge, you could use 20 gauge wire. But all I'm going to do is take this wire and just coil it a few times around the shaft or shank of this clasp. Push the coil together a little bit. Take your flush cutter, and we're going to cut the ends. And I'm going to cut these at a little bit of an angle so that it'll sit a little more flush. Cut the other end. And use your, I don't even have my my regular chain nose pliers out here, but I'm just going to use the square cut, or this square nose pliers, flat nose pliers, and just flatten those ends down. And then you can slide this up. Slide it up next to where we brought the wire, even bringing it in a tiny bit. And you can see our little mark there on the plier, or on the wire. And so we're going to take off, probably a little more than twice that from where the coil goes. And so there we've got the S-hook with the little coil in the middle. The other thing you can do is use some half round wire. There's the flat side, the round side, putting the flat side up against the shaft. Again, we're just going to wrap this wrap this, keeping the flat side, which doesn't want to do today. This is what sometimes when you use scrap wire, it doesn't always behave. And again, I'm just going to trim this, trim both ends, squeeze that in. And push it up here, and again you have a slightly different looking feature than we had with the coil. So here's 3 things you can do with just the wire. We got the square wire, which we've twisted. We've got the just regular round wire that you wrap around it, and then I've got the half round here, which still needs a little bit of work to make it look right. But there are other things you can do as well. One last thing I'm going to show you is I have a little length of, this is rose gold. This is an enameled wire. It's been enameled. And we've flush cut the end. I've marked the middle. And we're just going to turn this into a clasp. And again, carefully flatten the end. Depending upon the quality of your craft wire, the color might just lighten. It could potentially peel off, but just try to be careful. Okay, we take the end, we grab it, make our little C loop. I think I like using the flat nose pliers for this just because it looks so cool when you bring it down. Bring it into the round nose pliers. Wrap it around until it touches the end. So here at the beginning, it's just like everything else. Okay, so we've got our wire, and then I've got some rose gold wire that I believe is 26 gauge. 24 would also work, 22, and I'm just going to coil a couple of wraps on here, maybe 3 or 4. And then what I've got is I've got this little 3mm bead. If I can get it to come into focus. Okay, we put that on there. This is nice because we can use it to bring the wire up. Take this end of the wire and just wrap it around the bead, and then just begin coiling right up against the bead on the other side. So we have a coil on each side. Let's do one more. Take our flush cutters, trim that end, whip it around, trim the other end. You'll want to, pinch those ends in a little bit. So we're going to bring it in. Okay, we're going to trim roughly 1/4 inch off of the end, making sure that we flush cut it. bring it around till it touches. We're going to flatten the curves. Now, quite often when you're hammering, it will open up the curve or open up the loop a little bit, and that's fine. You can just readjust it. But there we have another S-hook with the little ball there at the beginning. And you don't have to limit yourself to just S-hooks. Here's an idea that I had where I took, actually, this is tiger eye, a little 4mm tiger eye bead, and I put it onto the J-hook and wrapped it in place. And if this bracelet or necklace was made up with tiger eye, we would have the, the tiger eye continued onto the clasp. And so you're just kind of limited by your imagination. You could put a little crystal round or an abacus bead on here. You could put more than one bead onto an S-hook, maybe a couple of small beads and a larger one in the middle. It's just whatever you want. You're not limited by color or what the bead store happens to have in stock. You can do whatever you would like. So there you have it. J-hooks, S-hooks, all made by you. I encourage all of you to give this a try. Get you some wire. It really doesn't matter what size it is. This is great for using up old scraps of wire, which anyone who works in wire usually has a bin filled with leftover ends of wire. And go out and make you some clasps. I would encourage you to do this. Also, we would appreciate it if you would hit the like button and also the subscribe button. And when you hit subscribe, make sure you ring the bell, the notification bell, and that way, when we come out with new tutorials and other videos, you'll instantly be notified. I appreciate you coming today, and if you go ahead and you make some of these clasps, go ahead and tell us about it down in the comments. Thanks for being here.